Okay, guys, welcome back. Section two, we're going to move into. Section one, we talked a little bit about the mobilization in the United States of America, getting ready for the war. We talked about the double V victory for African Americans, beating Hitler against his radical ideas and coming home and proving that they could fight and win and stop segregation at home. They were successful in the fact that the Tuskegee Airmen did prove that, and it paves the way for more and more desegregation and stuff. So now we're going to jump into the early battles of World War II. Now this is not going to be including some of this will be this will be including the United States of America. Sorry, that was a little uh, my brain wasn't going the right way. So let's just jump in right away. So the guy that you see right in the bottom there, if you don't know him, and maybe many of you do, he's very famous. He's Winston Churchill, and remember, he takes over as Prime Minister of Great Britain. Anybody remember what the Prime Minister was before, who kind of had the idea of appeasement? Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Okay, these guys kind of think a little bit differently, and you know what? Let's just read this quote from him, and you can kind of see why. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all cost. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long the road may be. For without victory, there is no survival. That is from Winston Churchill in 1940. So, yes, his idea was to win. And he and Franklin Delano Roosevelt got along very well, and they kind of had the same idea. And I believe because of that good relationship, that's why we were so successful. So we're going to jump over into the Pacific Theater. They call it the European Theater and the Pacific Theater. In the Pacific Theater, it really is United States of America fighting against the Japanese. And General Douglas MacArthur is stationed over in the Philippines. He is over there stationed. Remember Remember his great grandpa or his grandfather, I think it was. His grandfather, Arthur MacArthur. Remember, he was stationed in the Philippines as well during the Spanish American War. And then we said, hey, let's talk about it. Yeah. And then we find out that his grandson, Douglas MacArthur, also will be fighting over in the Pacific and in the Philippines against the Japanese. So it's kind of ironic and cool to think that you're stepping into your old grandpa's shoes and doing what he did. He was the commander of the Allied forces in the Pacific. He was in charge. Right after, so let me give you a little background leading up to this time. So 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces attack airfields in Manila, Philippines. 10 hours after Pearl Harbor, destroying the rest of America's fleet in the Pacific. So within 2 days, not only did we lose almost all of our Pacific ocean fleet, we also lost all of our air fleet in the Pacific within a 34-hour period. Crazy, huh? So Japanese really did deal us a strong, hard blow. Okay, 3 days later, Guam, an American possession, falls to Japan. Next, the Wake Islands, the British colony of the Hong Kong, Singapore in February, Dutch East Indies in March, Burma in April, and on May 6th, American troops have to withdraw from the Philippines. General MacArthur was forced to abandon 70,000 soldiers in the Philippines, but he promised that he will return. Now, these soldiers that were were forced to withdraw from the Philippines went to a small island not too far away called Bataan Island. And after a while, these American soldiers and Filipinos are captured. And you know what? I need to backtrack. Bataan Island, please don't think it's Bataan Island. That is my mistake on mine. They are trapped on the Bataan Peninsula. And these guys were forced to march to a prison camp, which was 65 miles long. And let me read a little bit about what one of the survivors said. They'd halt us in front of these big artesian wells so we could see the water, and they wouldn't let us have any. Anyone who would make a break for water would be shot or bayoneted. Then they were left there. Finally, it got so bad further along the road that you never got away from the stench of death. There were bodies laying all along the road in various degrees of decomposition, swollen, burst open, maggots crawling by the thousands. Leon Beck, quoted in Death March, The Survivors of Bataan. About 750 Americans and 5,000 Filipinos die on this march due to starvation, disease, random executions. So yeah, that I'm sure you've heard of it. It was atrocities that were sent. I believe President McCain. He was in World War II, and I believe he had, I don't know, some kind of connection with the Bataan Death March, or I'll have to look in that a little bit more. Okay, so look at all what's happening between Pearl Harbor and the fall of the Philippines. Japanese are just having their way with anybody that they want. So now, do you think it's about time where the Americans are going to say, all right, let's get this done. Let's start doing something on our own. And it really comes down to the Doolittle raid in April 18th, 1942. This idea was to wreak havoc on the Japanese. They were going to use, I think it was like 12 B-25 bombers to hit Tokyo. So they are able, in order to get there though, they had to get within 400 miles of the Japanese coast. That way the airplanes would have enough gas, diesel or whatever, fuel to get to their spot where they were going to drop the bombs and then continue on to friendly China where they were going to land. They needed that amount, enough gas, and in order to have that much gas, they had to get within 400 miles of the coast. However, around 625 miles from the coast, a Japanese ship spots them, and they had to decide right then and there, were they going to abandon this mission, or were they going to go through with it? And if they were going to go through with it, they had to launch now. Ultimately, they do launch, even though they knew it was a very, very good chance that they were not going to make it to China. All right, B-25 bombers, they take off. They make it to Tokyo. They do drop quite a few bombs. It wasn't really a lot of damage that was inflicted on them, but for morale, it was a huge win for the United States of America. It finally showed Japan that they were not invincible, and America could do some damage too. So it really was raised American morale and really damaged the Japanese psyche, thinking that how good they were. Unfortunately, almost all of the planes don't make it to China. Many of the pilots died or were captured by Japanese. A lot of them, when the planes kind of ran out of fuel in between Japan and China, they bail and parachute out, and a lot of them were never seen from again. So Doolittle's raid ends in sad conditions, but it does raise the morale of the Americans. So now, as Doolittle's raid kind of starts that switching the tides of the war, kind of boosts American morale. The first American victory is the Battle of Coral Sea, which is near New Guinea. It was airstrikes from aircraft carriers, and it protected the U.S. supply lines to Australia. So that was our first one. The next one that really turns the tide and basically puts Japan on the defense is the Battle of Midway. And this was June 4th, 1942, and Midway is near Hawaii. Midway, interesting to think about. Why did they call it Midway? Because it was exactly in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, midway between United States and Japan, China. So by breaking these Japanese codes, the U.S. ambushed and sunk 4 Japanese carriers and stopped the Japanese advance. And like I said, it was a turning point in the Pacific War. This next little video we're going to watch is an idea of a video from the History Channel about Midway.
Japan strikes Pearl Harbor, and America is at war. The aircraft carrier Enterprise leads the U.S. Navy as it strikes back. Now Enterprise is about to face the massive Japanese fleet at Midway. The main force of Japanese ships headed toward Midway include 4 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 150 support ships, 248 carrier aircraft, and some 15 submarines. The American Armada is substantially smaller. 3 aircraft carriers, 50 support ships, 233 carrier aircraft, 127 land-based aircraft on Midway Island, and 8 submarines. Outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, this is all that is left of America's Navy. The carriers were not present at the sneak attack.
The Japanese realize U.S. Navy aircraft carriers are still out there and are still dangerous. So what we need to do is get rid of their aircraft carriers and then set up one more outpost further out into the Eastern Pacific.
Dawn, June 4th, 1942. USS Enterprise floats near the exact center of the Pacific. A force of 109 Japanese aircraft appear over the atoll. They tear into the American base. 7 a.m. Reports of the attack on Midway reach the Enterprise. The flyers scramble to prepare for their launch. They'll have to fly nearly 2 hours to reach the Japanese ships. The Japanese carriers are hit by bombers.
I aimed at the big red circle at the front.
Enterprise's first attack on the Japanese fleet is breathtaking. The outnumbered flyers of Enterprise have wreaked havoc on the Imperial aircraft carriers.
He could look back and he could see the 3 big balls of fire. There were the 3 Japanese ships that were on fire.
Now there's only 1 Japanese carrier left, the Hiryu. Just before 11 a.m., Hiryu launches its bombers, a retaliatory strike. The first American carrier that lands in the Hiryu bomber's sights is USS Yorktown. And 3 bombs make direct hits on Yorktown's flight deck. At mid-afternoon, a second wave of bombers arrives from the Hiryu. 2 of the torpedoes score direct hits on Yorktown's port side. The listing deck is a serious problem for Yorktown's flyers. The angle means the Yorktown's aircraft have no place to land. There's only one hope for the stranded flyers of Yorktown, the deck of Enterprise. But there's one more enemy carrier out there. After more than an hour in the air, the dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown come in range of Hiryu. When Peace dives, it's a direct hit. The bow of Hiryu is torn apart. Fire spreads below decks. The Japanese Navy chooses to sink her. Admiral Yamamoto's plan to trap the American carriers has backfired spectacularly. In a single battle, 4 Japanese carriers are sunk. 1 cruiser is scuttled. 228 Japanese aircraft destroyed, and 3,000 Japanese sailors and crewmen are killed. Although the American losses include 1 destroyer and the carrier Yorktown, it is the most surprising victory in the annals of U.S. naval warfare. The epic naval clash off Midway Island changed the face of the Pacific War. It proved that America could not only fight back, it could win. Admiral Yamamoto and the Japanese High Command are shaken. They have awoken the giant and felt its wrath.
Young people in large numbers came out and joined what became known as the Red Guards.
Okay,
These largely terroristic organizations murder political enemies.
All right, we are moving forward here. If I can get going, my watch beeped. My phone is going off. Sorry if you guys hear that. Here we go. Good. But before we get into Europe, 2-1. The Japanese outnumbered us 2-1. And look at, it looked like we lost one destroyer, a battleship, maybe a carrier. So we didn't lose as much, but how awesome is that? It really makes me want to see the movie Midway, and I think a lot of you have. I still haven't. So this quarantine, I might have to rent that on my Netflix or Amazon Prime, because now I'm just all excited to see that. That looks really good. All right, let's jump from the Pacific theater to the European theater. Where Hitler is deciding to invade the Soviet Union. The reason why he wants to do this is he wants to knock out the Soviets quickly, so it really makes the Great Britain second guess if they really want to invade Europe. They technically haven't invaded fully. They will with us on D-Day. But he hopes that this invasion, this knockout punch to the Soviets, will make the Great Britain kind of give up hope. However, the spring of 1941, when the invasion was supposed to happen of the Soviet Unions, it was delayed by Mussolini's failures, so it was pushed back till June. But Italy tried to invade Greece and Egypt without really Germany's help, and it was disastrous. And Hitler had to come in and save Mussolini's butt and kind of take over, and we'll learn a little bit more about what happens in Northern Africa here in the next slide, or a couple slides. But eventually they get going, and they are invading the Soviet Union. The Soviets, when they invaded Russia, the Soviets got they retreated pretty early, and they're going back to protect Moscow and Leningrad. On their way back, they're using the scorched earth policy, and that basically means that anything in their way, they're going to destroy. They dismantled factories and rebuilt them further east. They took or destroyed all rail cars. They burned all crops, bridges, destroyed anything that would help the Nazis to stay strong and to advance. Winter came, and the Germans were forced to retreat. Okay, Stalin requests Allied troops in the east and a second front in the west. So why do you think Stalin wants the Allied troops, Great Britain and U.S., to invade the Western Front? Yeah, because remember, we've talked about it many times. You don't want to fight a war on both sides of you, okay? Because then you got to split up your soldiers. But that's what Stalin wanted to do to the Nazi military. Churchill, or FDR, wanted to attack Germany right away. Attack Germany, attack France, the European continent. He wanted to so bad. However, Churchill said, you know what, let's step back a little bit. I think we should attack the periphery of the German Empire, and that was Morocco and Algeria. So they decide to do that. Before we go on to that, but we're going to talk a little bit about Stalingrad. Eventually, Germany gets to Stalingrad, and their goal was to cut off the Soviet Union's access to oil fields along the Caspian Sea. This was a long, very vicious battle. Stalin, there's at times where the Soviet Unions could have surrendered. Stalin forbid it. In September and in November, reinforcements arrived and forces Germany's surrender. Ultimately, Germany will not surrender until February. Okay, that's 5 months of brutal fighting. This is one of the bloodiest battles up to history, in history, Battle of Stalingrad. For a few months, German Nazis are surrounded in the middle of Moscow, and Hitler said, do not surrender. He said, we will give you reinforcements by air. So for a while there, they were getting reinforcements by air, but eventually the Nazis just gave up and surrendered. This was a major turning point in the war on the Eastern Front, and Germany is on the run. So we talked about North Africa and Great Britain and U.S. This is where they start the first invasion. In the Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943. The idea is to plan, the plan was to trap Erwin Rommel's German Africa Corps between English and American armies. So Here's our American armies. Patton is leading those. And here is the UK, Great Britain. The idea was to get Rommel right in here between two armies and get him out. The first battle was not under Patton, and it was a disaster. Eisenhower fires that guy and puts in George Patton, and he was able to win and push Germans back and ultimately out of North Africa. So that was a huge win for the Allies. They come into North Africa and dispel and kick out the Germans. Battle of the Atlantic. Now, it's not necessarily an actual battle, so to speak, more of just a kind of skirmishes and U-boats, U-boats sinking American transport ships. So German submarines were very close off the coast of the United States of America. I was reading something, and it was really interesting that the German U-boats were really easily picked off American ships because they were so close that they could see the lights of the eastern coastal cities, and the ship would be like a silhouette backdropped with those city lights. So they're that close to America, and they're shooting ships. Within miles off the East Coast. I did not know that World War II and things happening got so close to Atlantic coasts. So what did the inhabitants of those cities do? They dimmed all their lights. They got blackout curtains. They would not use headlights at night, just to diminish the light so the German U-boats could not see our ships as easy. Isn't that interesting? I couldn't believe that and how close they were. Another way that they responded was the convoy system. To protect U.S. shipping, they got in a big group, and a few battleships sailed, and they followed. And the idea, those battleships were the first line of defense, and if they saw any U-boats, they'd shoot them down. Also, what helped was America, we were kicking butt in building ships, and we could build way more ships than the Germans sank. We also invented radar, sonar, depth charges to find and sink submarines. So we are really, really kicking it into gear. We are building ships. We are building ammunitions. We're inventing technology to help. And that ultimately, that's going to turn the battle around on the Atlantic too. Okay, that is the end of our slide. I wasn't expecting that, but it is. So thank you guys again. You'll do the questions at the end, and then we will see you for chapter 3.